Hello again. So I'm going to continue on from where I left off in my first little episode, and now I'm 3.5, and we are living in Gibraltar, that British protectorate that we captured off the Spanish in, I believe, the 1730s. And my father has been transferred to the Royal Naval Hospital in Gibraltar. We are living in a large house, or what seemed large at the time, and I believe it is quite a significant residence, 3 stories high, right near the gate of the Royal Naval Hospital. One of the first things I remember is my little red pedal car, which I believe I was given when I was 2.5, and it was my first set of wheels, so obviously it has a great significance. And I remember it very well. It was red with yellow piping, and I thought it was very splendid. And I used to pedal this furiously around the very nice gardens that surrounded the Naval Hospital. And I can remember the gardens very well. There was a sort of courtyard off to one side on overlooking Gibraltar is a mountain basically. So on one side of the grounds there was a courtyard with an open-sided brick shed that had 3 swings hanging from the rafters, and of course was called the swing shed. And me and my older brother Michael, who's 2.5 years older than me, used to spend a lot of time swinging on the swings and generally mucking about in the way that small or young children do. And it was a very nice place to live. We had a Spanish maid used to come in a couple of times a week to tidy up the house. My father was busy most of the time, either doing his duties at the hospital, or more often he seemed to be down in the dockyard, which of course Gibraltar is an important strategic naval base, or at least was then, with a very well developed harbour. And we also had a Spanish cook. And now this called Maria, and this is of great significance to me because one day I was playing around in the house and I heard this banging and thumping going on down in the ground floor kitchen. And so I went down to see what was happening, and I poked my head through the door, and there was Maria butchering a lamb on the cutting block. I mean, it was already dead, obviously, but and she was cutting it up and getting it ready for the evening meal. And it was obviously a lamb. I believe the head was lying to one side, and I was horrified. Oh. I should point out that Larry the Lamb, or Larry the Lamb, was the main protagonist in a children's program that the BBC put on, called Toy Town. Now, Children's Hour was an hour-long program that the BBC put on every day, and that we received without any problem at all in Gibraltar. And I believe it was Tuesdays. There was a half-hour episode of Toy Town, and as I said, Toy Town had various characters that were toys or animals, and Larry the Lamb was the main protagonist. There was also a German dachshund called, I can't remember what he was called, and a policeman and all this, and they got into various adventures. And as I said, Larry the Lamb was a hero of mine, and there was Maria chopping up a lamb, and I rushed upstairs to my mother in floods of tears and said on no way was I going to eat any of that meal. I thought the whole idea was horrible, and not only was I not going to eat that meal, I was not going to eat any more meat, because I thought killing animals and eating them was actually revolting, horrible, totally went against everything that I believed in, and incidentally still does. So from that time on I became a vegetarian. I should add that there is a problem with that idea, is terminology, in as much as I actually didn't eat any vegetables either. And in case you're wondering what I survived on, I should say that I ate a lot of cheese and crackers, and I particularly liked Heinz spaghetti. It had to be Heinz spaghetti. That was lunch. Breakfast was usually cereal, very often grape nuts or shredded wheat. I tend to be a person who eats the same thing every day, still am. And if you're concerned about my nutrition, I should point out that my supper was nearly always several pieces of fruit and some nuts. So, and those items actually still remain amongst my most favourite foods. So that was how I became a vegetarian. Other memories from Gibraltar was I can remember John, my eldest brother, who was a bit of a joker and always good fun. He was in the British Army at the time, based in Aldershot in England, but he did come out to visit us in Gibraltar several times. And I remember one time he came out, presumably in October or the beginning of November, and it was Guy Fawkes night, which is when the British go crazy and let off all kinds of fireworks. And he had bought a box of fireworks that he bought in London from Harrods, and it was actually illegal to set off fireworks in Gibraltar. This was partly to do with security and how close it was to the end of the war, and the fact that Gibraltar was a military base and you weren't allowed to let off fireworks. Anyway, John, being the fellow he was, decided that we could go over to the tennis courts, which were also in the grounds of the Naval Hospital, and quietly let off a few fireworks, and nobody would be any the wiser. So we went over there after dark, the whole family. I don't think my father went, because he probably disapproved and tried to stop this adventure. And anyway, we were quietly letting off a few small fireworks, Catherine wheels and the odd Roman candle and these kind of things, nothing too ostentatious, when a spark happened to get into the open box of fireworks, and the whole bloody lot went off. Fireworks shooting in all directions, rockets and bangers and all kinds of things. Anyway, we beat a hasty retreat home and lay low, expecting, the commandos or special forces to show up and find out what was going on. Anyway, that was a great deal of fun, and that was the kind of thing we got up to. And as far as I know, there were no repercussions from that. Talking of firework displays, I do remember, and I think I was 4 at the time, so that would have made it about 1950, looking out the nursery window, because we were fortunate enough, we had a nanny, I should point out, as well as my mother. We had a nanny who'd been with the family since the early 30s, and she was actually literally part of the family, so I was raised by these two very nice indulgent ladies, my mother and our nanny, Frida. And anyway, I was up in the nursery in the top floor, and I remember my brother Michael, who's 2.5 years older than me, was playing with the electric Hornby 00 train set on the floor, and I was up at the window because I'd noticed something was going on outside, and we could look down. We had a fine view of the harbour, which is there's a very big harbour, a well-developed harbour in Gibraltar, it being a naval base, a very strategic naval base. And so I looked out of the window down towards the harbour, which I imagine was a mile away or something like that, and I could see there was a ship on fire. There was a ship in the middle of the harbour, not actually tied up alongside any of the docks, but it was obviously tied to a buoy or something, and there was smoke pouring out of this ship, and I could actually see some flames, and I looked at it and thought, well, that doesn't look quite right. You have to understand I was only 4, so I didn't have a particular grasp on what was happening. But I remember I turned to my brother, who was on the floor below me, and I said, Mike, you should come and have a look at this. And just at that time, there was an enormous explosion, and my brother, who'd stood up, was knocked over by the blast. The window was open, and I wasn't, but there was a huge mushroom cloud went up over this ship, and all hell broke loose. Bells ringing, fire engines rushing around, and everybody in a sort of rather restrained state of panic, as suitable for the Brits. And I still didn't really know what had gone on, but I was informed, and it was also fairly obvious, that there had in fact been an explosion. Anyway, the long and the short of this is this was an ammunition ship bringing ammunition to Gibraltar, which there's large caverns, both natural and man-made, under Gibraltar, Gibraltar being a large chunk of limestone, an escarpment, if you will, and Gibraltar at the time, and probably still is, was used as a storage depot for a great deal of ammunition. And this ship had brought in a bunch of ammunition and ordnance to be unloaded at Gibraltar. And apparently some painters, this is kind of amazing, but they decided to paint the upper works of the ship, and they were scraping the paint off using blowtorches, and they set fire to the ship, which was unfortunate because they hadn't unloaded the ammunition, which makes it all the more amazing. You know, somebody wasn't thinking right. Anyway, they set fire to the ship, it caught fire. People on the ship abandoned ship and headed for shore because when they realized they couldn't put it out, and everybody hid, including my father, who was down in the dockyard and probably less than a quarter of a mile from the site of the explosion. And anyway, everybody hid behind blast walls and under tables and things, and there was a great deal of windows destroyed, and a piece of the ship actually ended up, a piece of the mast, I believe, ended up on the other side of Gibraltar, which gives you an idea of the power of the explosion, because Gibraltar is, I believe, I'm not sure, I think it's 1,600 feet high, or somewhere like that. Anyway, it's a significant obstacle to a large piece of metal that was thrown up into the air, and it landed on the beach the other side of Gibraltar. So I remember that pretty well, and that was very exciting. And my father returned that later that day with the little Standard 8 car with the sunroof blown out of it. Apparently he had the windows open, or one window open, and the blast went in the car and blew the roof out, which was obviously a weak point in the structure. And he returned home in his best number white tropical kit, which for some reason he was wearing that day, and he was covered in soot and smuts and other things, and that was exciting. So I also remember that. That was a very significant occurrence in those first 2 years that I remember of my childhood. I should say that my childhood in Gibraltar was very, very nice, almost perfect. We used to go swimming every day down at Rosier Bay, which was just a short walk down the hill from the hospital where we lived. And my older brother Michael would go fishing every day, which I never partook in because at the time I considered fishing to be rather cruel, and incidentally I still do, and especially if it's done for fun. So that's really what I remember. I remember Gibraltar being a very nice place for a little boy in a pedal car, and later on in a red tricycle. And I was very fortunate to have those 2 years in Gibraltar, 2.5 years in Gibraltar, which I think gave me a stable and positive view of life at the beginning, as it were. So I'll leave it at that for now, and we'll carry on in the next episode, which will pick up on our return to England, which I believe was the end of 1950. Might have been the end of 1951. My memory is not absolutely clear on that. When my father was posted back to England, and he took up a position as a surgeon on HMS Vanguard, which was the pride of the British Navy. This was quite a significant posting. The HMS Vanguard was a beautiful battleship that the British belatedly completed right at the end of the war, so she survived intact. I believe never fired her guns in anger. And I actually have a connection with HMS Vanguard, to which I will elucidate in the next episode. So thank you very much, and see you later.